G'day everyone and welcome. Pete Jones from Betfair here, and I'm joined by political trader Tavis Rendell in the final episode on our series of US politics trading. Thanks for joining us again, Tavis. Can you believe that we're only days away from the big event?
Good morning, Pete. Hello, everyone out there. No, I cannot believe it, my friend. It's hard to believe we started this thing about 4 or 5 months ago, and the year's flown by in so many ways. And here we are, a couple days away.
Exactly, how time has flown. We've got a lot to cover on the show. We're going to take a look at the expected timeline of events for election day and where to find the most up-to-date information. Tavis's final electoral college map and where he sees each of the swing states falling. Also the markets for each of these critical states and potential betting opportunities will be discussed. And we also have some really interesting viewer questions to discuss as well. So, but to kick things off, we're going to take a look at a chart from the 2016 election that my colleagues at Betfair have put together. And this basically shows the betting fluctuations. Let me just bring this up on the screen here. So, as you can see here, we've got the timeline down the bottom, and this is in terms of Australian Eastern Daylight Savings Time. So, at around 10 o'clock on election day 2016 is where the true market fluctuations really kicked off between Donald Trump and Hillary Clinton. So as you can see here, Trump's in the red, Hillary Clinton's in the blue. Trump was trading at around that $5.50 mark prior to, I guess, the first results coming out, or the first indications coming out anyhow. Trump drifted in the market out to close to $10 in the first hour of significant trading there. And from there, within 2 hours, Trump had firmed from around that $10 mark into $2.70, and by 2 o'clock that same day, he was in as short as $1.29, and obviously continued to firm and eventually win the election. So, can you just firstly explain, the fluctuations of 2016, what might have caused these to occur?
Sure. My guess is from there, that's a very detailed graph you have up there, and it's a great way to look at how elections are traded live, actually, as the ballots are being counted. Very risky endeavor, but very profitable endeavor if you know what you're doing. What you're seeing there, my guess is on that spike roughly coincides with Florida, what happened here in 2016. If you remember, as the results came in, Hillary Clinton jumped out to a big lead because the early vote was shown first. You didn't have a huge mail-in vote. Obviously, there wasn't a huge pandemic in 2016, so not as many people had to vote by mail. But Florida is a state where many people do nevertheless vote by mail. And in-person early voting and mail votes came in right away, okay? And so Hillary jumped out to a big lead. As a consequence, you see Trump's price go up here to around 9. Over here, I think it went up to as high as about 18 or 19 for a brief window of time. And then as in-person election day votes began to get counted, and remember, Republicans traditionally vote on election day, and much more so than Democrats do. Then that shift began to occur. Hillary's lead was quickly whittled away, and it became obvious to really sharp bettors that Trump was going to win Florida. And see, what you're seeing there are his national odds quickly thinning out there. And the real sharp money, it probably jumped on that within half an hour. And probably by 8:30 to 9 p.m. Eastern, our time, an hour and a half later, it was pretty clear who was going to win the election. I mean, the fact that he was even close in Michigan and Wisconsin at that point really caused a sharp overall plunge in his odds right there. And it actually wasn't. I know. He didn't make his victory speech, and Hillary conceded until around 2:30 a.m. But it was pretty much lights out by 9 p.m. Eastern. It was actually not that long of an election night from an overall perspective of who's going to win. So what you're seeing there is a quick early vote in Florida, and how the total shifted, which we'll get to a little bit later when we get to individual state betting. What you're seeing there is a rapid change in the Florida numbers.
Yep. What's also interesting to see with this chart is the bars in the background here, which represent the total volume traded on the exchange in 30-minute intervals. So from 11 o'clock, every 30-minute interval up until about 3:30, there was around 5 million traded. So that obviously contributed to the 2016 election being the biggest ever market on the Betfair exchange. There was a total of 320 million Australian dollars traded on the market. We have since exceeded that total with the 2020 election. We're now up to, I believe, over 420 million. So there's every chance that we'll get up as high as, or even higher than $500 million on this market, which is absolutely incredible. But we're now going to take a look at the 2020 election and just how you expect this to play out. So I was reading just the other day that that over 50% of the total votes from 2016 have already been submitted. So 46 million in postal votes and a further 23 million in early in-person voting. That figure may have increased since a couple of days ago that I read that stat. Is it safe to say that the total voters in 2020 will exceed 2016?
Oh, for sure. Yeah, I think they're already on pace to shadow the turnout from 2016. Traditionally, a higher turnout is thought to favor Democrats. No guarantee this year, obviously, with all the mail-in voting and just this type of election in the middle of a pandemic is really hard to truly know for sure who early voting and in-person voting in-person early voting and mail-in voting is going to benefit. But yeah, high turnout usually will favor Democrats. And for that reason, yeah, that's why you're seeing odds on Joe Biden thin out the past week. Turnout looks through the roof. I mean, you're having counties in Texas where they've already surpassed the number of total votes they've had in 2016. We're not even an election day where people are going to the polls yet. So, I mean, the fact that they've just through early voting alone, they've shadowed their records from 2016. Turnout looks to be through the roof. Much to my surprise, I did not think turnout would be quite this high and shadow the records. Certainly not beat 2016 by this much, but so far it has.
Okay. In terms of the timeline of how the day's going to pan out, so obviously the eastern states, the polling will close earlier. So at what time do the polls close in these states, and when can we start to see the early signs favouring Biden or Trump?
Great question, and this is where you want to be careful if you're live trading this election. The way in which each state will count their ballots differs on election night. Some states are allowed to process their mail-in ballots now. They can start doing it now, and all they have to do is tabulate them on election day. That can go relatively smoothly. Other states, Pennsylvania, for example, they're not even allowed to start opening their mail-in ballots until election day. So what you want to look for on election night and how we expect this to play out. And again, want to keep in mind, check your poll closing times for every state if you're live trading this. Florida closes at 7:30. Florida's in two time zones, remember. The panhandle of Florida is in the central time zone. So, but you're going to start seeing numbers from Florida as the eastern time zone polls close. So what you can expect to see early results on election night. Florida, three key states to pay attention to here. Florida, North Carolina, and Ohio. You're going to get early numbers out of all three of those. Georgia as well. That may be a little slower, but you should get an election night count on Georgia also. Those states are allowed to process and count their mail-in ballots before election day. They're doing it now. They're obviously going to count their election day in-person vote as well. So you're going to get numbers out of all four of those. The interesting scenario is Donald Trump could win all four of those. Then the race is going to shift to states where Biden is still favored, albeit those with a much slower count. Pennsylvania, Wisconsin, Michigan. If Biden wins those three, he's the president. Where we could be headed for a bit of trouble here in the U.S. is if Trump does win all those four early states that I mentioned, Florida, Ohio, North Carolina, Georgia, and just walks out and declares victory and says, no ballots mailed in after midnight. No ballots should be counted after midnight on November 3rd. We're in for a bit of trouble then. We're headed down an unforeseen path. But those are the four states in which you'll be able to watch early and live trade on election night. And we'll get to Florida in a minute when we get to how those votes are going to be counted in your individual state markets, because that's one state where I do see a live trading opportunity for listeners out there.
Okay. So what sources can you recommend for punters and traders looking to be ahead of the game here? No doubt the election is going to be covered on every major TV channel in Australia. But are there any sites or any people that you can follow on social media where you can potentially be ahead of the game?
Sure. I mean, plenty, hundreds of political pundits out there. You could follow. I'd say for your mainstream sources, you want to stick to CNN and New York Times. Um, they're pretty good with their dashboard and their live updates. But for individual states, if you're looking to maybe get a leg up, look at the individual state Secretary of State or Bureau of Elections websites. You'll often get different numbers out of there than you will that are being reported by CNN or New York Times. If you really want to get down to it, look for what we call bellwether counties, counties that may drift one way or another, that overall can give you a good clue or a cue as to how the overall state's going to vote. Okay, so you could go on to the individual, do your homework here, but go to the individual state Bureau of Elections or Secretary of State's website, and then you could look, even you could break it down, not just by overall state count, overall county websites. And you can see which way they're going, because they may have different numbers for you than the mainstream media, traditional sources like CNN and the New York Times.
Okay. So which of the key states will accept postal votes that haven't arrived by election day? I understand there's differences in the rulings of when the postal votes can be accepted. Some where they have to be received by the election day, and others where they have to be posted by election day. Which of these key states will be affected?
Absolutely, that is the case. And as we've covered here for our international audience before, we've said in many ways we're 50 nations under one flag. This particular requirement is no different. You're going to get radically different methods of accepting and counting mail-in ballots that differ greatly by state. And some states, your ballot has to arrive at the County Board of Elections by election day, period, no exceptions. If it's not there by 8 p.m., it doesn't count. Other states, as long as it's postmarked by election day, it can arrive 3, 6, 9 days later after the election, and it'll still count as long as it was mailed by election day, okay? The key states where this is going to matter for you on election night, Florida and Georgia don't accept any ballots that they don't receive by election day. North Carolina and Pennsylvania do. Pennsylvania, you're allowed to receive mail-in ballots 3 days after election day. North Carolina accepts mail-in ballots up to as much as 9 days after election day. As long as it's postmarked by then, it will still be counted. One more for you to keep in mind, Wisconsin does not. Wisconsin has to be there by election day. So those are the 5 key ones with those respective deadlines that I'd keep in mind, just because there are a lot of mail-in ballots to be counted this year. And this is why the media also should be careful in calling these states. Don't jump in heavily on a trading market if you're aware there are a ton of mail-in ballots left to be counted, unless you're sure, unless you have a pretty good hunch, how those ballots are going to drift and where they are.
Okay.
Important to keep in mind if you're live trading this thing.
Right. So in terms of trading strategies here, we just touched upon the likelihood of Trump potentially claiming victory early on or being as the eventual winner, only for the remaining postal votes to be counted and the potential of the election flipping back in favour of the Democrats here. Do you have a trading strategy that you can steer the viewers into?
In terms of how to live, if this thing goes into overtime, you mean?
Yeah, look, in terms of what you expect, the market fluctuations to do early on. So I assume that the postal votes, the early postal votes, will be counted, which may put things in favour of the Democrats, and then the in-person votes counted from there, which may swing things back in favour of the Republicans, only for the remaining postal votes to be still counted. Is there a trading strategy that you can sort of steer punters into to take advantage of these swings?
Absolutely. The state I pay attention to here is Florida, because you could easily see a repeat of what happened in 2016, and you'll see a real divide in like public money versus like sharp professional money involved here. What you could see in Florida is another instance where all the early vote is processed, counted, all the mail-in vote is processed and counted, and you see Joe Biden with a big lead. Okay, as a consequence, Trump's price in Florida and overall could easily start to drift out like it was here. And if you were quick, you could have Donald Trump here to win the presidency up at around 18 or 19, just for a small window. And you'll have to be fast on this. But if you do see Joe Biden early on election night, let's say that first hour, a half hour, then that would be a great time where you may be able to get Trump to win Florida at 7-1. I think Trump could easily win Florida. In fact, I'd say he's favored to still. So you're getting a real steal just by Biden could obviously hang on to that lead, but I would expect that lead to shrink as in-person election day votes leaning Republican are counted, and you begin to see Joe Biden's lead fall. So again, if you want your money on Trump, I would get some in now, but you could also try this move and get if you want to hold out for a better value, it's a great way to do it. Wait for that first hour in Florida, watch the numbers carefully, and I'd expect him to eat into Joe Biden's lead. That's one state where you're going to see, I think, Pete, I think you'll see the biggest discrepancy between mail-in voting numbers and in-person numbers.
Sure. Well, let's take a look at your final electoral map here. So for viewers who've read Tavis's recent article, you would have seen that he's provided his up-to-date electoral map and showed a number of toss-up states. As you can see, the states there in grey, North Carolina, Georgia, and Florida. So what we'd love from you here today, Tavis, is to decide the outcome of these states and see where we land in terms of the total votes for Biden and Trump.
Absolutely, Pete. And shout out to all the viewers out there. And just to Pete's going to put me on the line today to push these toss-ups into a final call. But stay in touch with us on Twitter. I do reserve the right to change my mind in the next few days. So I will tweet out, just a promise to all you guys out there, I will tweet out my final picks. But Pete is putting me under the gun right now and making me do a call on each of them. So just a brief summation before we get to the toss-ups of the last week. I am putting Ohio, if I'm keeping Ohio and Iowa as lean Republican, lean Trump. And the most intriguing of those all is Texas. I do think Biden's come remarkably close, and I do think turnout is through the roof. If I have to pick, I'm still leaving that as lean Republican. Right. And I'm also leaving just in this, as you see at the top right of your screen there, the 2nd Congressional District of Maine, which is mainly the northern woods part of the state when you get outside of Portland and Bangor, Maine. I'm going to leave that Trump. I do expect, and it's a really demographically favorable territory for Trump. Biden really has looked good in all the polls there, and he's certainly eaten into that lead, but I'm going to leave that as lean Trump. You see in the little candy cane striped portion of your upper right corner. So that said, Pete, let's move on to the toss-up, shall we?
All right, let's start with North Carolina.
You want to start with North Carolina? Okay.
Yeah, where do you see this one heading?
This is actually, to the viewers, this is self-confession. This is the hardest of all 50 states for me to call. I think this is right on a knife's edge. This is a true coin flip. It is changing fast, as is Georgia, which we'll get to. I'm going to say it just goes Trump by a point. It's just going to be the small hill too far for Biden to climb on that. But moving down, I do see more promising territory. I can't believe I'm about to say this, and we're living in a world where he could win Georgia, and I'm going to say I'm going to push Georgia right now to the blue column. I'm going to turn Georgia light blue. This would be quite the story, as would Texas. I'm going to say Georgia finally breaks for the Democrats. They've long gone after this, and I think this could finally be the year. Biden's expanded his polling lead in the final week. Turnout's really high, and I think they finally get over the line. If you're making me choose, I'm going to say Biden.
Sure.
The last one, this may surprise a few people here, Florida. I don't think it looks good for the Democrats. I think that early voting lead that Biden has had there, again, you should be wary of over-interpreting early voting in a year like this. That said, I just don't see it if I'm forced to make a pick. I got to say Trump wins by a point or two. I'd put that light red. I think Biden's weakness with Cuban Hispanics and African-American voters, although he has gained greatly among white seniors, I don't think it's going to be enough. He is a good Florida candidate demographically from that perspective. He'll probably even set recent records for Democrats with a senior vote. I just don't think it'll be enough. It's too many structural disadvantages there for the Democrats. And the early voting lead they have now, you can find these numbers online if you do your research, it's just not going to be enough to withstand the onslaught of a giant Trump turnout on election day. I see Biden losing Florida. I could look like really I could look like a fool on all three of these picks, Pete, 5 days from now. But that's where those are my picks right now.
Yep. Okay.
Having said that, viewers, stay tuned. Monday, Tuesday, I will tweet out a final map, but
Sure,
that's where I have to see it stand. That's where I see it standing right now.
The demographic of Florida certainly seems to be in favor of Trump with the retirees and the Latino voters that Biden has always struggled with. So, with you there. So, I guess if you take a look at the total votes in the at the top of the
screen. And just real quick point of clarification there, Pete. Just one more note to the viewers why I do that. I think Florida is just a very inelastic state. It doesn't change much, whereas I think Georgia and North Carolina do. They are changing much faster than Florida. You got a real high influx of educated voters moving there every year for more and more jobs in North Carolina and Georgia. So I know it looks strange to see a map where Florida goes to Trump and Georgia goes to Biden, but I do think how fast the momentum is changing in those two states, it could happen. Right. I'm sorry, go ahead.
Yeah, sure. So I was just going to point out the total votes at the top of the screen with Biden 306, Trump 232. But I guess quite easily, and particularly the states you have a light shade of blue, Pennsylvania, Michigan, Wisconsin. Notice that you also have, Georgia, Arizona, Nevada. So I guess all that would be required is for two to three of these states to flip back in favor of the Republicans, and all of a sudden you have Trump above 270 and winning the election, right?
Absolutely. The tipping point state right here, that the number that would probably put Joe Biden over 270 is Pennsylvania. But I do want to point out to the viewers here that, well, you might look at the electoral vote market and think, okay, well, he's up by 74 votes. It really doesn't take that much. I do forecast this race to be closer than many analysts do. It's just, I believe, another confession, I had long believed Donald Trump was going to win this election. I expected the race to tighten. It just comes a point at which you have to look at the numerical evidence and the polling, and it just hasn't happened. And there comes a point where you have to let the evidence do the talking, and it's still closer. As you say, 2 or 3 states, Pennsylvania and Arizona, you add that up, and one more, or Georgia, right there. That's 36. Pennsylvania and Georgia. Biden's hold on Georgia, obviously not strong. Arizona, not that strong. Pennsylvania would be the one domino Trump would have to knock out of that column, and then Donald Trump's the president. And it's really not that inconceivable. I think it's a much closer race than others do.
So I guess if you
would not take much of a shift.
If you take Pennsylvania and Georgia away from Biden, that's 36, brings him down to 270, and Trump up to 268, I believe.
Sure.
So that would cause some chaotic scenes over in the US, I'd imagine.
It would, and if you want to get even more chaotic, he could not win that congressional district in Nebraska, which is where you see the blue stripe on your map. That would get down to 269 to 269, an electoral college tie. In which case, that's kicked into the House of Representatives. We don't have time for a 3-hour deep dive into constitutional law here, but that's when things could get pretty chaotic. Trump would probably have the advantage there. Each state gets 1 vote, by the way. Each state's congressional delegation gets 1 vote. You could even have a tie after that, at which point consult your legal sources, because things could get complicated.